If you're a stepmom who cares deeply, this episode might feel very familiar. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't not caring, it's caring so much that you start carrying problems that were never really yours to hold. You see the gaps, you see what isn't working, you try to help, steady things, support people, protect everyone, and slowly you end up exhausted. This conversation is about that line so many stepmoms struggle with. The line between caring and over-carrying. And if you've been feeling overwhelmed by things that affect you deeply but aren't fully in your control, stay with us because this is exactly the kind of dynamic that can keep a stepmom stuck for years. I'm Katie South and this is Stepmom Space, the judgment-free zone where we talk candidly about the fairy tales and scary tales of stepmom life. So whether you've been a stepmom for years, you're just starting out, or you want to understand the stepmom in your life a bit better, this is the place for you. My guest today is Amy. Amy is a mum of 4 who later found herself navigating stepfamily life when she met her partner who had 2 children of his own. In this conversation, we talk about what happens when you enter stepfamily life with a lot of care, a lot of experience, and a genuine desire to help, and how complicated things can become when the roles inside that family aren't always clear. Let's get into it. So, Amy, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here.
I'm really looking forward to chatting to you today. And when I got your voice note, I was really impressed by your raising of 4 children, basically single-handedly. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Not a lot of people are impressed, although I suppose it is quite impressive raising 4 kids. So I've got 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. I had my first baby at 18. So she's 24 in a few weeks. So we grew up together, really. And then I had my son a couple of years later. Same dad, but again, very young, wasn't ready to be a parent or even a partner, really, I would say. So we parted ways and there was never any parental responsibility, never involvement from him, their upbringing or anything. They didn't have his name or anything. They were my babies. And then I met someone else and got married and had 2 children with him. So he did take on the stepdad role in a way, but never fully. There was always a real divide. So long story short, that marriage didn't work out, that being one of the reasons why. And whilst I have had other relationships since, I've always been fully responsible for all 4 children and accountable, I suppose, for how they've turned out, good or bad. So yeah, that's me and my 4.
Well, it's funny because you say that you're accountable for how they turn out, whether they're good or bad. But what tends to happen with women is if something goes wrong with the children, you blame yourselves. But if something goes well with the children, you congratulate them.
Yes, yeah. And they've all achieved. I mean, my youngest is 17. And like I said, the eldest is nearly 24. And they're all really good people. So yeah, some of that's on them, but I suppose I have to take some credit for that myself as well.
Yeah, good for you. And the story obviously didn't stop there with the children in your life. So talk us through what happened next.
So about 5 years ago, I met someone at work. He actually worked for me, a bit of a HR nightmare, I suppose. But we met as friends to start with. He was a member of my team. So I was aware of his children, as you do when you've got someone in your team and sometimes they'll say, oh, I can't make that meeting because I've got a school run to do, or I've got to take some time off because one of the kids are ill or whatever. So I was aware that he had 2 sons that lived with him 50% of the time, was probably the extent of what I knew. I knew that one was at high school, one was at primary school, but nothing too in-depth about them because at that point he was just a member of my team. 3 years ago, we started working even closer together, and then I was leaving the business. I was handing things over to him. We were talking more, getting more involved with each other, and it became a romantic relationship, which was really nice. He's a really lovely guy. And I got to know more about his family, obviously, and his setup. And one of the big things that jumps out when I listen to other episodes of the podcast is how many stepmums that engage with Stepmum Space don't actually have biological children of their own. They go in as stepmum into their first foray. And in hindsight, when I look back now, I think, is that better? Because obviously when he would say things to me about his children, and in those early days of a relationship, I think you don't want to step on toes or anything, so you nod along and say, oh, that sounds great. But I would sometimes think, oh, that isn't how I would do it. Whereas I think if you don't already have biological children, there isn't that prerequisite. You don't know how you'd handle it. So I suppose you're in a different headspace. But for me, that early doors conversations, I used to think, oh, is that the right decision that you're making there about your children or that kind of thing?
And the amber flags that were coming up for you, was that when you were friends or when you were a couple?
Probably a bit of both in hindsight, but I think obviously when we were just friends, it was kind of like you've got to deal with the consequences of those decisions. I think sometimes I would see him getting quite frustrated. So this was like COVID times, so everybody was doing everything via Zoom or Teams, etc. And I would see that like he would go on mute and then you could see him saying something off camera and he was clearly getting like quite annoyed with his children. And I'd be saying to him, just go sort them out. It's fine. We'll continue this meeting a bit later. Go sort out what you need to do. And he'd get quite frustrated by it. I don't think he juggled the parenting and working bit too well in COVID. And we were all in a strange situation, where we said there was no judgment. But then as we started to get to know each other better, he would say things like, I co-parent really well with my ex-wife. We get on really well. He even took a day off to go to her wedding when she got remarried to somebody else. And then as we did get together as a couple, it became obvious, if you like, that his sole focus was making sure that those children were okay, and that's perfectly fine. That's how you would expect it to be. But there was almost a fear that if he didn't go along with how the ex-wife wanted things, like his presence at her wedding or him having the children when she wanted him to, that he was worried that she would stop him seeing the children, which again, I know is a very common theme when listening to episodes of your podcast, but also other interactions I've had with stepmums, that there is always this almost fear of the biological mum stopping things, being the dictator in the relationship. So that was probably a red flag prior to us getting together, and it just became more apparent when we became a couple.
So how did it play out then from when you got together?
So the biggest challenge that we had when we got together was the fact that we actually lived 100 miles apart. So I used to travel a lot for work, which is how we got more engaged with each other, if you like. But he lives 100 miles away from where I live. Obviously, I've got a very established household with all 4 of my grown-up children still living at home, but that's a different challenge. So we had that challenge, and that was always a concern for him because he had his children 50% of the time. And in fact, do you know what? In hindsight, it was more than 50% because there would often be times where his ex would say, can you keep the kids an extra night because I need to do this or I need to do that. So it often panned out that he was actually having them more than 50%. So he was always very nervous of our relationship getting too in-depth because of the distance between us and the impact that would have.
And in terms of neither of you wanting to uproot and move your lives because of your respective children?
Exactly that. I owned my home as well, so that was another factor, whereas he was in a rented property. So realistically, logistically, it would have been easier for him to make the move because of property, etc. But also, yeah, we both had established lives where we were. As we got together and things were progressing and it was more than just a casual relationship, we'd fallen in love, we wanted to be together more. I was spending more time there because obviously my children are older and could fend for themselves, if you like. So it started to look like I would maybe move down there at some point. And that wasn't an issue necessarily for me, or I would spend 50% of my time in both places, or we were looking at all sorts of options. It was never written in the stars that he would make the move away from his children. That was never a plan that we had.
And how long had you guys been together at this point when you were talking about moving in together?
Probably about a year. I think things had gone on for about a year and we were thinking the job that I was doing was changing. So for me, it was the travel maybe wouldn't take me there as much. We'd have to engineer it more rather than it just naturally happen. So we were talking about how much we enjoyed spending time together. At that point, I was spending time with his children as well because they were with him so much. But that was very early on, probably 4 or 5 months into the relationship. I started spending time at their home with them and him in their environment. And there wasn't a massive issue at that point. Again, I think the biggest challenge for me has been the difference in parenting styles that I've seen. We've almost got 3 in the mix. So there's my parenting style, which, rightly or wrongly, I feel is almost sort of like proven. I've raised 4 children. This is the situation they're in. This is how it's panned out. This is how I've approached things. Then there's my partner's parenting style, which again doesn't necessarily directly align with mine, but more because we think differently, not necessarily because I'm right and he's wrong, just that I'm a very strategic, operational person. He's very procedural. He likes process, and it's just a different way of approaching things. We're the same at work as we are at home. But then in the mix as well was obviously his ex's parenting style, which was completely different to both of ours. And that's where I think cracks started to show, really, as we were more involved in each other's lives. His children now are 18 and 13. So at the time, when we first got together, they was 14, 15, 10, very different ages, different personalities. And when I met my partner, he'd introduced me to his 2 sons at the time. The older one, who was 14, 15 at the time, he is diagnosed with autism, so quite reserved, didn't spend a lot of time with us, liked to be in his room, in his own space. But the time that he did spend with us, we would have a laugh with each other. We got along. He met my children and got along okay with them. Again, a bit older, a bit more grown-up conversation, bit of banter, that kind of thing. They all got on quite well. The younger child had started to display desires to change their gender and said, I don't feel like a boy, I want to be recognised as a girl. Again, at that point, my personal opinions, I sort of kept to myself and said, I'll support whatever is needed. If we are going to start calling him she, that's fine, I'll embrace that. Just let me know what decisions you and mum make, and I'll support that in any way that I can. But again, this is where another problem came in. Mum made the decision that, okay, you're starting high school. And let's say these conversations started in like the July, August. My partner's daughter, as we now refer to her, started high school in the September as a girl. And that decision was made by mum, who took her out and bought a girl's uniform. And we were just told, this is it. She's now presenting as a girl. And that for me was probably the first point that I sort of really said, if I'm going to be involved in your lives, this cannot happen. These huge life-changing decisions cannot be made by one parent or the other without research, without consideration for the future, without considering what impacts this will have on other family members, on the child themselves. No conversations were had with the school particularly. And just for me, the approach was all wrong. And that was the point where I think I really started to struggle with the stepmum role. Up until that point, it had been quite hands-off. It had been quite going out shopping on a weekend, braiding hair before bed, brushing hair, that kind of thing. Not big life-changing decisions that we were not involved in. That really didn't sit well with me.
And I guess before we start, I have to say I've got no real direct experience of children changing the way they present or the pronouns they want to use. So I will ask for forgiveness if I get it wrong.
No, that's fine. I'm still learning as well, don't worry.
So from what you're saying, the child who was introduced to you as the son started talking in the July about wanting to present as a girl, and by September, that was it, done.
Yes.
Okay. It's so hard to know, isn't it? I guess those feelings that she had been there for a long time.
Yeah. So this child had always been described as dramatic, theatrical, tantrumed quite a lot. And I would agree that at 10 years old, the behaviours displayed were lots of frustration, very emotional, very clearly uncomfortable with themselves in some way. So there was questions around, is it a sexuality issue? Is there any awareness of sexuality? That kind of thing. And then I think in hindsight, post-transition, now that everyone refers to her as a girl, and if I'm honest with you, she's 13 now and presents as a girl fully. And if you met her, I don't think you would know that she was actually born a boy. So I think at the moment, things are probably easier than they could be in the future. But obviously I wasn't around when she was a young child, but she, from a very young age, would always like to go into the dressing up box and pick out a princess costume rather than a Robin Hood costume or a pirate or whatever. Always liked to clomp around in mum's shoes and things like that, which if I think back to my children being young, my sons used to do that as well, put my shoes on and wander around in them. Or one of my sons had a doll's pram and a doll, and he used to say it was his baby and take it everywhere with him. And I never thought that's the sort of behaviour that means that one day might want to transition into a female. But I think now that they are looking back, they are saying that from quite a young age that she was more comfortable presenting differently and always had what they refer to as a feminine edge.
If you're listening to this and recognising a pattern in yourself, anxiety before contact, walking on eggshells in your own home, never fully able to relax when the kids are there, replaying conversations for hours, or finding that one text message can throw your entire week off track, that's not a personality flaw. It's the position you've ended up inside your stepfamily system. And understanding it is powerful, but understanding alone won't shift it. Back in Control is my structured program for stepmums who want to move out of chronic adjustment and vigilance and into steadiness. It's psychologically grounded, contained, and designed for women who are done living on edge in their own home. If you're ready for more than just insight, search Stepmum Space Back in Control and you'll find the details. Back to the show. Well, I mean, God, there's such a lot to unpack in there. And I guess the first thing I'm thinking, so one of my sons went through a phase of wanting to wear skirts. So I was like, yeah, you can wear a skirt if you want. Didn't give it a second thought that it might be about how they wanted to present, because the next week he wanted to be a dog and we had to call him Bingo, and he ate his cereal out of a bowl on the floor. But it's hard, isn't it, to know how much to be led by the child, and in things like changing your gender, I guess it's something that's harder to experiment with. And again, I'm really conscious of saying the wrong thing, so apologies if I am. I'm learning as I go on this. When she decided she wanted to transition, did your partner's ex talk to him about the implications on their child's future and the choices that she would be making?
No, and that is my biggest problem with it. So at that point, they still had quite a, they would call it a healthy co-parenting relationship. I think it was incredibly unhealthy, but again, that's just opinion. But at that point, they still communicated. The children were still with my partner 50% of the time, so he still lived there. So spoiler alert, he no longer lives there 100 miles away. He lives with me now, which is a later part of the story. But at that point, it was still exactly the same. So they still communicated constantly, but there was never a sit-down conversation or how I would have approached it. And sometimes I suppose I'm a bit too businesslike with things, but with this, I would have got all of the adults involved, or at least mum and dad, around a table looking at what the implications were. Because, like I say, it was months before they actually went into school and sat down with the school to discuss it. And that only came off the back of a behaviour problem that was occurring with this child in school. So they were called in to discuss it. And then they brought another teacher in to discuss it. And that teacher wasn't actually aware that the child was trans. And that, for me, was, again, a big red flag. And that starts triggering in my mind, these are the people that should know. How do they address this situation? Which toilets does she use at school? How is she protected when she's getting changed for PE? And all of these questions start running through my mind. And again, I appreciate my mind works very different to my partner's or clearly to his ex-wife's. But by that point, their relationship had started to break down, because I was pointing things out that I think they should have considered. My partner was relaying them to his ex-wife. She didn't like the challenge that she felt she was coming up against. And so their relationship started to break down, because then he would defend me. She would say, I know it's just her asking all these things. She didn't want a relationship with me by that point. She wasn't interested in what I had to offer to the party. She wanted it back how it was, where ex-husband did everything she said when she said, and everything that she wanted happened the way that she wanted it, and she'd lost control of that. And so that had started to break down. So all of these things would come out in a really piecemeal way. So his daughter would come home and say, I want to go on this school trip and it will cost X amount. So I need this amount off mum, I need this amount off dad. Or an email would come out. And that was because mum and dad weren't communicating very well. So a lot of it went through the child, which again bothered me. And then my mind would immediately go, right, this is a residential trip. Where is this child going to sleep? Can't sleep with the girls, can't sleep with the boys. Where will the changing facilities be? Which toilets will she use? How will she be accommodated, etc., etc. And they didn't communicate about that. They didn't have that conversation. It didn't enter their head. And that's where it started to cause friction between my partner and me, because I felt like I was constantly challenging and thinking of all of the things. They didn't take her to the doctors when she said, I want to transition to be a girl. Neither of them thought, right, let's go see the GP. Neither of them understood that it was a mental health condition that would need to be diagnosed, that she would need to take hormones, that they need to start the process now before puberty. And for me, that and the breakdown in their relationship meant that then neither of them were communicating with each other about decisions being made. And that's where it all, over the last couple of years, it has really unravelled quite negatively because of that.
And all those types of things around taking puberty blockers. I mean, I know it's quite a high profile topic at the moment, and at what age can you decide and at what age should you decide and what are the implications and can you go back, and all of those really, really tricky questions. So you would think even at the most basic, you would want to be sitting with your child and both their parents and having a really honest conversation with a professional about what this means, because with young children, you know, no child thinks about the long-term implications of the decisions that they might be making. And that's not to minimize the experience of anyone going through anything like this. It's really just to say, you know, make the decisions with the facts in mind, and particularly when it's something like that for a child. So I guess the thing I'm curious about is, at the point that all this started to happen, you'd known the kids a little while, but you felt pretty invested in the situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the key things, my partner and I are completely different people. And I know that they say opposites attract, but we have so many differences in our approach, in our ways of thinking, in our life goals, in our ambition. Everything probably about us is quite different, but we just work and we just got on so well from the minute that we met. And I think that I've had 3 really key relationships in my life, and this is the strongest one. This is the one that I can see going the distance. This is the one that I can see. I have no fear of the future where the children have gone and grown up and doing their own thing, and they only come when they need us to cook a Sunday lunch or borrow some money, or all the things that happen as children grow up. I'm not sat thinking, oh no, what is it going to be like when it's just the 2 of us? Whereas in past relationships, I have had that bit. If I thought about the future with my ex-husband, even when I was married to him, the thought of not having the children as a distraction and all of the other things in your life. Whereas with my partner now, he is the person that I will be with for the rest of my life, and that I can see myself retired with and having nice holidays. So for me, I was invested really early because I'd not connected with anybody else like that. So yes, I was invested really early on, and I am absolutely determined that any challenges we have from our children, and I don't just mean his children, my children as well, or any other family members or his ex-wife or anybody, an outside influence will not split us up. If we ever split up, it will be because we've made that decision based on something in our relationship. And that's really helped. The last couple of years have been incredibly challenging with all of this going on and other things. And we've got through it and we're going to get through it. So yes, I was invested early on, despite all of these challenges.
And even invested in the child, like it would have been maybe easier on you to just say, well, that's for him and the mum to figure out. I'm not touching that.
Yeah, I think that's where the difference between having your own children when you enter into this stepmum role maybe kicks in, because not everyone has a maternal instinct. If you'd have asked me when I was younger, whether I thought I was a natural mum, I would have probably said no. When my first child was born, as much as I liked babies and things like that, I was 18. I didn't have a natural maternal instinct. But I think over the years, I suppose I've come out of it thinking this is something I'm quite good at, actually. I can apply everything I know and my way of thinking to a solution to every problem that we've overcome as a family. So I think that maternal instinct did kick in, regardless of the fact of whether it's your child or not. One controversial thing that I believe as a stepmom is I don't think you do have to love your stepchildren. And I don't think that does come naturally to people. And when I see or hear stepmoms saying, we treat them all the same, I love them all the same, whether they're my bio children or not, that's great. But for me, that isn't the case. I obviously wouldn't want any harm to come to my stepchildren, and I'm very proud of what they achieve. But I don't have the same love for them as I do for my children. And I wouldn't expect my partner to have the same love for my children as he does for his own. I just think that's almost a primal thing. But ultimately for me, at the heart of all of this situation is a child who has clearly had lots of confusion, lots of conflicting feelings, lots of change go on in her life, not just around this transitioning, but in the past, mum and dad splitting up, mum remarrying, mum's had another child, there's problems, issues with her older brother. There's lots of change. Dad then moved away to live with me, and I suppose in a child's eyes, that's how black and white it was. Dad used to live here near to me, and now he lives there with her. So I understand all of that, and I take all of that into account. And for me, the important thing is that she comes out of this experience happy and healthy, because that's all I want that's all I've wanted for my children. And that's all I want for anybody's children, really, that they are as happy as they can be and as healthy as they can be. And I worry that that isn't going to be the case, that she's either going to come through it healthy but be unhappy, or vice versa, or not achieve either of those things.
You know, you hit on such a classic stepmom problem that we come across all the time, which is women who are over-functioning as a stepmom, caring a bit too much, getting a bit too involved, as in it's causing you a lot of emotional stress to get involved to this level. You're doing it because you care, but actually the only person benefiting is potentially the child, but maybe not, because what you're saying might not get through anyway because of mum and dad. So putting yourself through that, it sounds like a lot. So what else has gone on the past couple of years?
Quite a lot, actually, now that you're saying it like that. So my partner's older son, like I say, he has autism and he has difficulty controlling his emotions. So it gets quite angry. And when we first met, there were some problems with him at school in that he would get angry. He spent a lot of time in an isolation space because he couldn't regulate his temper. And I think that he would have really benefited from socialising more. My children are very sociable creatures, to the point where sometimes you just like, leave me alone and let me have some time. They are very chatty. They will talk to anyone, whether they know them or not, and can engage well. And they could as children, and they can definitely do that as adults. Whereas my partner's children struggled with that, still struggle with that. And I get situations are different. My household has always been busy. It's always been the hub of the family, whereas they've been in a different environment. So that might be an impact. When it came to him leaving school, he actually moved in with his dad full time at that point because he was more comfortable there. He had his own space, his own bedroom. At mum's, he was sharing with his brother who was transitioning to female. So it was a very difficult situation all around. So he moved in full time with dad, left school, started college. Day one of college, probably an hour into the first lesson, rang mum and dad and said, I don't like this, I'm coming home, and didn't go back to college at all. That was mum and dad's decision, that he doesn't have to go to college because he doesn't like the environment. And again, at that point, very early days in our relationship, I was sort of asking probing questions like, do you think that's the best thing for him? What is it going to do instead? But again, mum and dad still communicated at that point. We got a few months down the line and nothing had progressed, not gone back to college, not found a job, wasn't doing anything, not an apprenticeship, becoming more and more withdrawn, probably to the point of depressed. Was encouraged to get a job. I still had quite a good relationship with him at this point. I could still talk to him, helped him brush up his CV, all the practical things, wrote his cover letter with him, encouraged him to apply for jobs, sent links for jobs that he could apply for or apprenticeships or whatever was appropriate. and he managed to land a job, a Christmas temp job in a shop. After a second shift, came home. I was at home with his dad in their home, and they've said, actually, it's not as busy as we thought, so we don't need you anymore. So the temp job's been done. It's like, oh no, that's a shame. I'm surprised because it's Christmas and it's a very well-known retail store that will be busy.
Something doesn't quite add up here.
It's not quite right. So I left it a couple of weeks, thought he might get something else. Nothing happened. So I said to Dad, I'm not convinced that's what happened. I'm going to ring the store and ask them if that's what happened. So Dad agreed, and pivotally, Mum agreed. He spoke to Mum, and Mum said, yeah, okay. So I did that. I rang the store, pretended I was a prospective employer and said, oh, he said he worked for you for a few weeks. Can you tell me how he did? And they said, no, actually, that isn't what happened. He got angry at a situation and stormed out of the shop. We never saw him again. So Dad and I sat him down to discuss that with him, and he actually absolutely lost the plot. He was so angry. And unfortunately, that was the unwinding of his relationship with his dad, because he felt challenged and he felt disrespected. And I was the problem then at that point.
And I mean, I guess in that situation, like, he was challenged, and there will be people listening to this thinking, okay, well, that's an overstep on a stepmom to make that call. Should that have been a parent thing to do?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And that's why I suggested it. And then they both agreed, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's find out what happened. Yeah. And then I was the one, I suppose, out of the conversation. It came out, yeah, you do it, which I did. And again, you're right. There are going to be, throughout this story, there are probably a lot of overstepped conversations or things that have happened. Because, like I say, Mum and Dad, I just feel like neither of them will take the step. And I think the overriding problems in this step-parent relationship for me is that I do challenge, but nobody else in the family or entire part of it do. And that's where Mum's never been challenged by my partner, because he's not a naturally challenging person. And in turn, the children have never been challenged by either of them.
Do you think it makes your life more difficult, though, to take that approach? Because it's really well documented that women who have specific ideas about how children should be raised can find this role so challenging, because you do have a big responsibility, but none of the authority, the roles of what you're there to do and what you're not there to do is really ambiguous. So that can be really difficult. So was there ever any point where you thought, do you know what? This is causing me a lot of hassle. I'm just going to leave these kids to turn out how their parents want to turn out and be grateful that my four are okay?
Yes, we're at that point now, I would say. So the last probably 6 months, maybe, that is where I am. I don't get involved. Obviously, my partner and I will have conversations and I will give him my opinion or how I would approach it, but I don't get involved. So if we fast forward to today, where the situation is now, my partner has no relationship with his eldest son, because post the situation that I just described, Mum completely went back on it and said, yeah, you're right, she was out of order to do that. I back you, son. And Dad and Amy are in the wrong. And that really was the end of my trying to help, because I thought, if I'm not going to be backed up and Dad's not going to be backed up, what's the point? Let her deal with that situation. So unfortunately, Dad is still trying to rebuild that relationship. And I think as his son is getting older, there is chinks of light where maybe that relationship will rebuild. But his daughter now spends every other weekend with us and then time in the holidays. But I very much leave Dad to the parenting. Obviously, if I'm cooking a meal for the family, I cook for the family. If we're going out somewhere specific and she's with us, I'll engage with her. But it's very surface level now, very surface level. And that's difficult for me as an individual, because I think I do have a very direct approach to things. But that is the only way that we can get through this time, I think, because my involvement, whilst appreciated from Dad, isn't appreciated by Mum. And I don't want to make that situation any worse. They're starting to rebuild their communication. But in the background, I can see that things are not progressing with his daughter's transition as well as they could. She's being allowed to make decisions about things that I think will impact her in the future as an adult. But I'm very much just taking a back seat now and like you say, letting it play out and let mum and dad deal with it. Because I add that stress to myself that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think the mum, she would still be trying to say to him, you can't walk out of every job or every college or every... I feel like now we're very understanding of people's mental health and people's anxieties, and that's brilliant. But I feel like we are not teaching our young people how to be resilient in life.
I absolutely agree. And as somebody who employs quite a lot of young people, we're seeing that as well, just across the world. So it's not just about parent and child relationships or step-parent relationships. I think it's across the board. You're absolutely right. And that for me has always been my goal, really, I suppose, that they will get the best out of life that they can. Because I just think you only get one life. We get to our ages and think, oh, if I'd have done this differently in the past, or I'd have had this person pushing me, I'd be happier. Or whatever. Like I say, happiness and health has got to be the two key things for me. So that has always been the focus. It's always come from a good place, but I completely misunderstood the relationship of being a stepmom. I think it is the hardest job. I always used to say being a parent is difficult, but I think being a stepmom is just totally different. Totally.
And I think it's even harder if you're somebody who really cares, because if you're in a situation where your stepkids have got a great mum, a great dad, and actually you get to be the sort of fun auntie type role, that's like the fucking dream, right?
Absolutely. That is what I would love to be in the situation of.
And then when you are in a situation like a lot of the women who come to me, and they'll be saying, you know, I can see with my stepkids too much screen time, too much shit food, not enough getting outside, not enough having to have chores and have a bit of responsibility. I sound like a right wicked stepmom witch person now. But, you know, life is difficult sometimes, and we have to equip our young people with the skills to get through that shit temp jobs that we all had growing up. My first job, I'll tell you how old I am now. I worked in a shoe shop for £1.78 an hour in the height of summer. It was disgusting. All these scummy feet, sweaty. But I did it, and I was really proud of the money that I earned. And I really think you have to do those things in life. So I am quite passionate about kids having chores. Yeah. And I don't mean, you know, Cinderella sweep the floor. And actually, I don't necessarily mean for my stepdaughter. I mean for my biological children who are here all the time. One of the things, they're only 7 and 9, but one of the basic things is like unload the dishwasher in the morning. And the other day, my daughter comes down, she's 7, and I was ironing and we were chatting. And then after a little while, I said to her, can you unload the dishwasher, please, darling? She went, well, why can't you do it? I said, well, I'm ironing. And she's like, why can't you do it afterwards? I said, because I've got other things to do. And she went, well, why do I have to do everything? And we were having this discussion. I said, you don't have to do everything. I said, anyway, part of the thing is I have to teach you how to do some of these things so that when you're older and you've got your own house, you know how to do them. She goes, don't worry, I'll just get my kids to do them. Like, you get us to do everything. And I was talking to a friend about it later, and I was like, am I being too harsh? And she was like, no. Nowadays, sometimes I think we've gone too far the other way, that we're just like, children don't have to do anything.
No, it is true. And I think the thing is, everything revolves around them when they're really young, and you can understand how that evolves. And we tell them, you're a princess, your mum is little prince, you're this, you're that. You can understand why they get themselves on that pedestal. And I think you have to knock them off it, is probably the wrong term, but make them understand that is not the only way they'll get back on a pedestal, is if they get themselves there, if they build themselves up to that, or achieve, or do all of these things. And this is where it comes in that my kids are grown up, they've got careers, or they're at university, one's just doing her A-levels, and they've all got A-levels. And I'm not saying that I think that his son should have gone to college, but his son should be doing something. And he's still now, 2 years on, he's 18, doesn't have a job, hasn't gone to college, hasn't done anything, but lives with mum full time. And again, it gets to the point where it's like, that's not my problem then. I tried to help at that point. Like, say, did CVs, wrote cover letters, helped with interview techniques, like mock interviews and things like that, because that's my wheelhouse. I can help with that. And it wasn't received in the right way. Maybe it wasn't delivered in the right way. I don't know now. I can reflect on it. But I did the same things there that I did with my children. But what I forget, I suppose, is that he'd already had 16 years of this influence, not 16 years of my influence.
Yeah.
So it landed differently, I suppose. And I think that's the biggest struggle for me as a stepmom. It's like going into a new job and having to pick up what somebody else's approach has been and how they've done it and try and redo it. And like you said, that's not my job. That's not what I'm here for. So now my support is very much, I emotionally support my partner and I try and give practical advice where I can. I still do have stress in the back of my head because I see things happening and unraveling, and I can almost sort of like see the writing on the wall, especially for his daughter, because I know that she's got big challenges ahead in terms of transitioning male to female. I know other male to females who are older, who've had that transition, who've had that challenge. And I just think if mum and dad were not equipped to discuss it and make a decision or help her make a decision when she was a child, how are they going to handle it when she's actually an adult and needs more? She's going to need emotional support, financial support, potentially physical support if she has surgery and that kind of thing. And how are they going to equip themselves to deal with that? And that's where my stress now is, because I think I can't influence it anymore. I've done what I can, I think.
Yeah. And one of the things that I work with a lot of women on is what I call that influence gap. It's the gap where there's something that has a huge impact on you, either mentally, emotionally, practically, but you actually don't have any control over it. So you have no control over how mum talks to her daughter about all of this stuff. And almost the more you consume yourself with worrying about it, the harder you'll make yourself. But it's a really, really difficult step for a lot of women to make, to say, I'm going to accept that that's not mine to carry, that situation. With a lot of the women we work with, we say, that's not your situation. Put that bag down, because that is not yours to carry and it's hard. But recognizing that can actually be incredibly freeing for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I am much further along in that journey than I was. I do think we as a couple would benefit from therapy around that, around how it impacts me, because I think he doesn't identify the frustrations quite so readily unless I directly say to him, this frustrates me about how you approach this with this child, or why you haven't thought about this. So that is something that I'm considering, but it's when is the right time? Because I feel like if we have therapy now as a couple about this situation, we're going to need it again in a year, because so much will change in that time. And then again, so it might be that it's a constant need. But like I said, I'm so invested in this relationship. That's not a problem for me, because it is a very unique situation. It's not a standard step-parent situation, because there is this additional layer with his daughter transitioning. And again, I don't have a problem with it at all. And I am very supportive of being who you want to be. And if I'm honest, on reflection, she is a much happier child now than when I first met her. She was a ball of frustration. That's why she was getting into trouble at school. She was struggling with mum and dad. We would frequently get calls from mum on mum's time saying, you need to come and pick this child up because there's been a kick-off, or there's been an upset, or I've been in a shopping centre and she's ran away, because there was real behaviour issues. And that was born from frustration of not knowing who she was, not being comfortable in her own skin, all of those things. So I think now she's actually a happier child than she was. But there is another layer to this. We've not nailed the blending of the family at all. This is a completely non-blended family in any shape or form. And that for me now is the bit that does impact me, because every other weekend when she spends time here, it is so difficult to try and do anything collectively. Like I say, my kids are very sociable, and yes, they have their own lives. They're at work or they're out doing whatever they're doing. But when they are here, everyone really struggles. We had a family holiday abroad in August, and it was very much my partner and his daughter and us. And so that's the next phase. I think that's where we probably need to look for some help or some support, because that gap, it's just not bridging. Even though nearly 2 years we've lived together and she's been interacting with my kids every other week and holidays for that length of time, there is no connection at all.
Do you think you're putting too much pressure on yourself?
Maybe, because I would say 99% of the time it doesn't impact anything really. It just makes me sad that when she's here, she's in her room. Most of the time she will take a meal up there if she's allowed to. And it just makes me sad because it makes me sad for them as well as dad and daughter. They go off, she's got a couple of activities that she likes to do that we've introduced her to, and they go off and do those on a weekend, and that's great. They have that time. But it's a 2-hour car journey from where she lives to here. And she sits with her AirPods in on her iPad, and he has his AirPod in listening to a podcast for 2 hours. And their relationship isn't great. And then it makes me sad that when she's here, there's no relationship there either. It's a pressure, maybe not, because I'm not putting pressure on myself to improve that, but it does make me sad. That is the case, definitely.
Yeah, and she's missing out on the opportunity to have a really loving extended family in your children, albeit not sharing biology, but there is still the opportunity to have that.
Massively, yeah, definitely. And whilst there is a slight age gap, there is still crossovers. We can still play games together. And sometimes she does, but the minute the game has ended, she leaves the room and there's no chit chat. It's like strangers. And that's the bit that I find quite sad for her as well, because she doesn't get that at home either. Her older brother keeps himself tucked away. She's then got a younger brother with mum's new husband. They don't do a lot of interaction there. So that, I suppose that is the one thing that it is quite sad. She's missing out.
Do you enjoy the weekends when she comes to stay with you?
Not particularly, no. I feel a bit on edge. There's no tantrums anymore like there used to be, which is good because everybody was a bit like, oh, I don't want to invite my friend round on a weekend when she's here in case there is a tantrum or an issue. That's all stopped. And like I said, that's good for her as well. It must have been so exhausting to constantly be upset and uptight. But I feel a bit on edge. We can't plan anything. Like, for example, this upcoming weekend is a weekend where she's coming to stay with us, and we've been invited to a friend's 50th birthday party. But typically, I think if we had got further on with the blending of the family, we could say, like, we've spent all day with you, but we're going to pop out for a couple of hours to this party, but you're okay because you're here with your step-siblings and you can order a pizza and you can all watch a movie and we'll be back before you know it. And then it's best of both worlds, but that's not an option. So I'm going on my own. So it's that kind of impact where there is an impact, but I'm at that acceptance level now rather than getting stressed about it.
And what would you tell yourself if you were starting over?
Don't get emotionally invested, which is really difficult, but get less emotionally invested, because at the beginning I was almost excited to have more people in the family, more children to care for and be involved with and help grow and be a part of my family, our family, that we would come together. And I think in hindsight, I didn't know anything about being a stepmum. I don't have many friends that are stepmums. Or at the time, I didn't realise the challenges they were having as stepmums until the conversation starts coming out. So I would just have prepared myself a bit more for the challenges, because I thought it was going to be quite rosy. I've done this before. I've brought 4 kids up. What can be so difficult about being involved with 2 more children? What on earth can the problem be? So yeah, I would definitely manage my own expectations better.
Yeah, and that's great advice for anyone, not necessarily do less, but it is great advice to manage your expectations and remind yourself that when things don't go as you want them to, it's not your fault. It's not always anybody's fault. It's just a system that is really, really, really difficult to navigate. And sometimes we all get it wrong. Sometimes one person gets it right, one person gets it wrong, but it's constantly evolving. And I guess the message for people listening here is it's really good to try, but if your efforts keep getting you nowhere, then maybe just pull back. And that's not to say go into ignoring kids or anything like that, but just to move to a more accepting space, if that's possible.
Exactly that. I think, and every situation's unique, isn't it? I'm sure that there are some bio mums out there that would fully welcome another woman coming in and helping where she can. That hasn't been the case in my situation. I've been seen as interfering and affecting her relationship with her ex-husband and influencing and all of those things. So that hasn't been well received. You hear that a lot as well, where bio mum and stepmum don't get on. But I don't think that's always the case. So I don't think people should go in defensively, because that might not be the case for you. I think you might get on really well with biomum. She might be really welcoming of your support or concern, but just be prepared that it might not be received in the manner it's intended, I suppose, is the message.
Yeah. Look, Amy, it's been so nice to talk to you today.
It's been great to speak to you as well. It's almost been like a mini therapy session. I feel much better.
Sometimes that's all you need, is somebody to talk to and somebody who gets it. A lot of my clients will say, I've tried therapy. I couldn't either be myself and say the really difficult things I feel because I was worried about being judged, or they just don't get the dynamic. So it's always lovely to be able to create that space for people to bring all of their stuff to unpack, really. So
thank you. No, thank you. It's been really good.
If this conversation brought up something in you, maybe that's worth paying attention to. Because many stepmoms spend years trying harder, carrying more, and blaming themselves for dynamics they didn't create. You do not have to keep doing that alone. If you want more support with this kind of dynamic, Back in Control is where I help stepmoms work through exactly these patterns with more clarity and less self-blame. You'll find the link in the show notes. I'll be back next week with another new episode. Till then, take care. And before we finish, if you're listening to Stepmom Space and recognising yourself in the constant adjustment, the walking on eggshells, the anticipatory anxiety before contact, or the way one message can derail your whole week, that doesn't make you weak. It's a position many stepmoms find themselves pulled into inside complex stepfamily systems, and it's more common than people realise. Back in Control is my structured program for stepmoms who are ready to move out of chronic vigilance and into steadiness inside their own home. It's psychologically grounded, contained, and designed specifically for stepfamilies where dynamics feel destabilising. If you're ready for more than just insight, search Stepmom Space Back in Control and you'll find the details. Back in Control, structured support for stepmoms who are done walking on eggshells and are ready to feel steady again.